What if I told you that the cure for anxiety has been hiding in plain sight for over 2,000 years? What if the very thing that modern neuroscience is just beginning to understand was already perfectly mapped out by ancient philosophers who had no brain scanners, no laboratories, and no peer-reviewed journals? Today, I'm going to share with you a story that bridges 25 centuries of human wisdom. It's the story of a slave who became one of history's greatest teachers, and how his revolutionary approach to anxiety is now being validated by cutting-edge brain research. This isn't just another self-help story. This is about discovering a fundamental truth that could change how you experience worry, fear, and uncertainty forever. Let me take you back to ancient Rome. Around 50 AD, picture the dusty streets of the Eternal City, where marble columns cast long shadows and the air is thick with the sounds of merchants, soldiers, and slaves going about their daily lives. In this world, there lived a man named Epictetus. But here's what makes his story remarkable. Epictetus wasn't born free. He was born into slavery, owned by a cruel master named Epictetus, who served in the court of Emperor Nero. Now, imagine for a moment what it would be like to wake up every day knowing that your life isn't your own. Every decision, every movement, every word you speak could be controlled by someone else. You might think that such a person would be consumed by anxiety, by worry about what tomorrow might bring, by fear of punishment or suffering. But Epictetus discovered something extraordinary during those years of bondage, something that would eventually make him one of the most influential teachers in human history. The story goes that during his time as a slave, Epictetus's master once began twisting his leg during a particularly cruel punishment. Instead of screaming or begging for mercy, Epictetus calmly warned him, "You are going to break my leg." When his master continued, and the bone indeed snapped, Epictetus simply said, "There, I told you so," without a trace of anger or distress. In his voice, now you might be thinking this sounds impossible, maybe even inhuman. How could someone respond to such cruelty with such composure? But here's where the story gets fascinating, because what Epictetus understood intuitively 20 centuries ago is exactly what modern neuroscience is proving today. Let me share with you what was happening in Epictetus's mind during that moment, and why it holds the key to understanding anxiety in a completely new way. You see, while his master was focused on controlling his body, Epictetus had learned to recognize something profound. There was a part of him that remained completely free, no matter what happened to his physical form. He had discovered what modern psychologists now call the observer self, and what neuroscientists recognize as the prefrontal cortex's ability to step back from emotional reactivity. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how Epictetus came to this realization, because his journey from anxious slave to serene philosopher contains lessons that could transform your relationship with worry forever. During his years in bondage, Epictetus noticed something curious about his fellow slaves. Some were constantly tormented by anxiety, always worried about what their masters might do next, always anticipating the worst possible outcomes. Others, while certainly not happy about their circumstances, seemed to maintain an inner peace that no amount of external hardship could disturb. What was the difference? Epictetus began to pay careful attention to his own thoughts and reactions. He noticed that when he focused on things he couldn't control, his master's mood, the weather, whether he would be punished, his mind would spiral into worry and fear. But when he focused on things he could control, his thoughts, his reactions, his character, he felt a sense of calm power, even in the midst of difficult circumstances. This observation led him to develop what would become one of the most powerful anxiety management techniques ever discovered. He called it the Dichotomy of Control, and it's so simple yet so profound that it's almost shocking. Pause for emphasis. Here it is. At any given moment, Everything in your experience falls into one of two categories: things you can control and things you cannot control. That's it. And here's the revolutionary part. Anxiety only exists when we try to control things that are outside our control. Now, let me show you how modern science has validated this ancient insight. In 2019, researchers at Stanford University conducted a fascinating study using brain imaging technology. They asked participants to engage in worry-inducing thoughts while monitoring their neural activity. What they discovered was remarkable. When people worried about things outside their control, like other people's opinions, future events, or past mistakes, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, showed intense activation. Stress hormones like cortisol flooded their systems. Their breathing became shallow, their heart rate increased, and their cognitive function decreased. But here's what's truly amazing. When the same participants were taught to redirect their attention to things within their control, their breathing, their thoughts, their present actions, the brain scans showed a completely different pattern. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center, became more active. The amygdala calmed down. Stress hormones decreased, and participants reported feeling more centered and capable. What these scientists had discovered using million-dollar equipment was exactly what Epictetus had figured out through pure observation and philosophical inquiry 2,000 years earlier. The human mind has an incredible capacity to choose where it focuses its attention, and that choice determines whether we experience anxiety or peace. But let me continue with Epictetus's story, because what happened next shows us how to apply this wisdom in practice. Eventually, Epictetus gained his freedom, though historical records aren't clear exactly how. Some say his master freed him out of respect for his philosophical insights. Others suggest he was freed after his master's death. But what we do know is that once free, Epictetus didn't spend his time seeking revenge or harboring resentment. Instead, he devoted his life to teaching others what he had learned about the nature of freedom and anxiety. He established a school in Greece where students from across the Roman Empire came to learn his approach to living. And here's what's beautiful. His teaching method wasn't abstract or theoretical. It was intensely practical. He would present his students with real-life scenarios and guide them through the process of identifying what was and wasn't within their control. For example, imagine a student came to him worried about an upcoming public speaking engagement. Epictetus would ask, "Can you control whether the audience likes your speech?" The student might say, "Well, I can try to make it good, ... And Epictetus would respond, "No, you cannot control their reaction. You can only control your preparation, your effort, and your attitude. Focus there, and anxiety disappears." This might sound overly simple, but modern cognitive behavioral therapy has validated this approach extensively. Dr. Aaron Beck, the founder of CBT, discovered that anxiety disorders almost always involve what he called cognitive distortions, thinking patterns where we believe we can or should control things that are actually outside our influence. 2020 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Anxiety Disorders reviewed 157 studies involving over 20,000 participants and found that interventions based on accepting what cannot be controlled while focusing action on what can be controlled showed remarkable effectiveness. Participants experienced an average 60% reduction in anxiety symptoms, with benefits lasting long after the treatment ended. But here's what makes Epictetus's approach even more powerful than modern therapeutic techniques. He didn't just teach what to think. He taught how to think about thinking itself. He understood that the real problem isn't external circumstances, but our relationship with our own mental processes. Let me share with you one of his most profound insights. Epictetus taught that we are not upset by things, but by our judgments about things. Think about that for a moment. Pause. When you feel anxious, it's never really about what's happening. It's about the story you're telling yourself about what's happening, and more importantly, about what you think it means for your future. Consider this example. Two people receive the same medical test results, showing some abnormal findings that require further investigation. One person immediately spirals into anxiety, imagining worst-case scenarios, unable to sleep or concentrate. The other person thinks, "This is concerning, and I'll need to follow up with my doctor, but there's nothing productive I can do right now except take care of myself and wait for more information." Same external situation, completely different internal experiences. The difference isn't in the circumstances, but in how each person relates to their thoughts about the circumstances. Modern neuroscience has a name for this: metacognition, or thinking about thinking. Researchers at Harvard Medical School have found that people who develop strong metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe their thoughts without being controlled by them, show significantly lower activity in the default mode, network of the brain, which is associated with worry and rumination. This is exactly what Epictetus was teaching his students to develop. He called it prosos, a state of continuous attention to the present moment and awareness of one's mental processes. What's remarkable is that brain imaging studies of experienced meditators show that this ancient practice literally rewires the brain, strengthening the connections between the prefrontal cortex and other brain regions, while reducing the reactivity of the amygdala. But let me tell you about one of Epictetus's students who put these teachings to the ultimate test. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and he would become one of the most powerful people in human history, the Emperor of Rome. Now, imagine the anxiety that comes with ruling an empire. Every decision affects millions of lives. Enemies threaten from all directions. Plagues devastate cities. Military campaigns determine the fate of civilizations. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal during his reign, writing to himself about how to apply Epictetus's teachings to the overwhelming responsibilities of leadership. These writings, which we now call meditations, give us an intimate look at how someone used ancient wisdom to manage extreme anxiety and pressure. In one entry, he writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In another, "Today I escaped anxiety." Or no, I discarded it because it was within me, in my own perceptions, not outside. What's fascinating is that modern research on executive leadership has found that the most effective leaders under pressure consistently demonstrate the exact same mental habits that Marcus Aurelius cultivated. They focus on what they can influence rather than what they can't. They make decisions based on values rather than fears. They view challenges as information rather than threats. A 2021 study published in the Harvard Business Review followed 200 CEOs over 5 years and found that those who practiced what researchers called cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift attention between what can and cannot be controlled, showed 40% lower stress hormone levels and were rated as more effective by their teams, even during crisis periods. But here's what I find most inspiring about this. Ancient wisdom. It doesn't require you to be an emperor or a philosopher to apply it. The same principles that helped a slave find peace and an emperor lead effectively can transform how you experience anxiety in your daily life. Let me walk you through a practical exercise that combines Epictetus's insights with modern therapeutic techniques. The next time you notice anxiety arising, pause and ask yourself 3 questions. First, what specifically am I worried about? Get clear on the actual concern rather than the vague sense of unease. Second, what aspects of this situation can I actually influence through my actions? Make a concrete list. Third, what aspects are completely outside my control? Be honest about this. Now, here's the crucial part. For everything in the cannot, Control category. Practice what Epictetus called preferred indifference. Yes, you might prefer certain outcomes, but you recognize that your peace of mind doesn't depend on getting them. For everything in the can control category, focus your energy and attention there completely. Modern psychologists call this response, flexibility, and brain imaging studies show that people who practice this regularly develop stronger neural pathways associated with emotional regulation and cognitive control. The amygdala becomes less reactive, the prefrontal cortex becomes more active, and the overall network of brain regions associated with well-being shows increased connectivity. But there's an even deeper level to this ancient wisdom. Epictetus taught that when we truly understand the dichotomy of control, we discover something remarkable. Most of what we worry about falls into the cannot control category, and most of what we can actually control, we've been neglecting. Think about your own anxiety patterns. How much mental energy do you spend worrying about other people's opinions, future events, past mistakes, or circumstances beyond your influence? Now think about how much attention you give to things you can absolutely control. Your breathing, your posture, your focus in this moment, the kindness in your voice, the effort you put into your work, the way you treat yourself in your own mind. This realization is both humbling and incredibly liberating. It's humbling because it shows us how much energy we waste on futile worry. It's liberating because it reveals vast areas of power we didn't know we had. Recent research in positive psychology has found that people who focus their attention and effort on their sphere of influence rather than their sphere of concern report significantly higher levels of life satisfaction and lower levels of anxiety. They also tend to expand their actual influence over time, because focused action in areas where you have control creates momentum, capability. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Epictetus' teaching is what he said about the nature of freedom itself. He taught that no one can make you anxious without your permission. Pause for emphasis. Think about that statement. It means that even in the most difficult circumstances, there remains a space between what happens to you and how you respond. In that space lies your freedom. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, would later echo this same insight. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Modern neuroscience has identified the biological basis for this freedom. It's the space between stimulus and response that's mediated by the prefrontal cortex. When we strengthen this neural circuit through practice, through repeatedly choosing our response rather than reacting automatically, we literally expand our freedom at the neurological level. This is why meditation, mindfulness, and other contemplative practices are so effective for anxiety. They're not just relaxation techniques, they're freedom practices. They strengthen your capacity to choose your mental state, regardless of external circumstances. But here's something important. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to life. Epictetus wasn't teaching detachment from outcomes because he didn't care about outcomes. He was teaching it because caring too much about things you can't control makes you less effective at influencing what you actually can control. When you're not consumed by anxiety about results, you can put more energy into the process. When you're not worried about failure, you can take more meaningful risks. When you're not trying to control other people's reactions, you can be more authentic in your relationships. Modern performance psychology has validated this paradox extensively. Athletes who focus on their technique rather than winning perform better. Students who focus on learning rather than grades achieve higher academic success. Artists who create for the joy of creation rather than for approval produce more innovative work. The ancient Stoics called this the discipline of desire, wanting what happens rather than demanding that what you want must happen. It sounds like a subtle distinction, but it creates a completely different relationship with reality. Let me share with you a modern example of how this works. Sarah was a marketing executive who came to therapy with severe presentation anxiety. Every time she had to speak to clients, she would spend weeks beforehand imagining everything that could go wrong. Her sleep suffered, her appetite disappeared, and ironically, her presentations suffered because she was so focused on potential failure rather than actual preparation. Working with a therapist, Sarah learned to identify what she could and couldn't control about her presentations. She couldn't control whether clients would like her ideas, whether technical difficulties would occur, or whether her competitors would be chosen instead. But she could control her preparation, her breathing techniques, her slide design, and her attitude. The transformation was remarkable. By redirecting her energy from uncontrollable outcomes to controllable processes, Sarah not only eliminated her presentation anxiety, she actually became more persuasive because her authenticity and confidence increased when she wasn't trying to control her audience's reactions. This brings us to one of the most practical applications of ancient wisdom for modern anxiety, the practice of morning reflection. Epictetus taught his students to begin each day by reviewing what they could and couldn't control about the day ahead. Marcus Aurelius did this every morning, writing reminders to himself about focusing on his character and actions rather than on outcomes and other people's behaviors. Research on morning routines has found that people who start their day with intentional reflection show lower cortisol levels throughout the day and report feeling more prepared to handle challenges. The key is not just positive thinking, but realistic thinking, honestly acknowledging what's within your influence and what isn't. Here's a simple practice you can try. Spend 5 minutes each morning asking yourself, what can I control today? Make a mental or written list. Then ask, what might I be tempted to worry about that's actually outside my control? Acknowledge these concerns, but commit to redirecting your attention back to your list of controllable factors whenever you notice your mind drifting toward worry. But perhaps the most profound gift of this ancient wisdom is how it changes your relationship with uncertainty itself. Most anxiety stems from the desire for certainty in an uncertain world. We want to know how things will turn out, what other people think of us, whether our efforts will succeed. Epictetus taught that uncertainty isn't a problem to be solved. It's a fundamental characteristic of life to be accepted. When you stop fighting against uncertainty and start working skillfully within it, anxiety loses its power over you. Modern researchers studying resilience have found that people who cope best with uncertainty share a common characteristic. They focus on building their capacity to respond well to whatever happens, rather than trying to predict or control what will happen. Think about a surfer riding a wave. The surfer can't control the wave, its size, shape, or power. But a skilled surfer can read the wave, adjust their position, and respond to its changes moment by moment. The beauty and joy come not from controlling the wave, but from dancing skillfully with forces larger than themselves. This is what Epictetus was teaching about life itself. You can't control the waves of circumstance, but you can become a skilled surfer of your own experience. You can develop the balance, awareness, and responsiveness that allow you to navigate whatever comes with grace and effectiveness. As we near the end of our journey through this ancient wisdom, I want to leave you with the most important insight of all. The cure for anxiety isn't about eliminating all worry or achieving perfect calm. It's about developing a fundamentally different relationship with your own mind. When you understand that thoughts are mental events rather than facts, that emotions are temporary experiences rather than permanent states, and that your peace of mind depends on your response to circumstances rather than the circumstances themselves, you discover a freedom that no external situation can take away. This is what Epictetus discovered in slavery, what Marcus Aurelius applied in leadership, and what modern neuroscience has validated through decades of research. It's available to you right now, in this moment, regardless of what you're facing in your life. The practice is simple, but not easy. It requires patience, self-compassion, and consistent attention. Start small. The next time you notice anxiety arising, pause and ask, is this something I can control? If yes, focus your energy there. If no, practice letting go while maintaining awareness of what you actually can influence. Remember, this isn't about becoming emotionally numb or indifferent to outcomes. It's about becoming more skillful in how you relate to your inner experience. It's about discovering that your deepest security comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from trusting your ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. Ancient wisdom meets modern science in this beautiful truth. You have more power over your anxiety than you might have ever imagined, and that power lies not in changing your circumstances, but in changing your relationship with your own mind. The cure for anxiety has been waiting for you all along, hidden in the space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. In that space, you'll find not just peace, but the kind of freedom that no one and nothing can ever take away. Take a deep breath. Notice that even right now, in this moment, you can choose where to place your attention. That choice, simple as it is the beginning of everything.